Elections are usually an exciting time for the American people. However, with the two-party system dominating the political establishment here in Washington, some ask whether there are higher powers at stake and how much influence they wield over the city. Now, someone who's no stranger to this topic is Ralph Nader. He was a presidential hopeful under the Independent and Green Party ticket. He sits down now with RT. Mr. Nader, thank you so much for joining us. Now, my first question to you is about U.S. foreign policy. Under both political parties, I wonder if there are differences between how they look at the START Treaty, for example, or the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, or policies towards Iran. Are there really differences between these two parties when it comes to U.S. foreign policy?
Less and less. On the START Treaty, there are some Republicans that are against it. The Republicans for it, and mostly all the Democrats are for it. So there's a little difference there. But on Iraq, on Afghanistan, on Israel, Palestine, on the self-given power of the U.S. government to go anywhere in the world and chase anybody down, any country, regardless of national sovereignties, the similarity between Obama and Bush have startled political analysts. When Bush launched the wars, he was not able to legitimize them. Obama, by extending the war in Afghanistan, expanding drones, going into Pakistan, going into Somalia, into Yemen, saying he'll go after anybody that he and the executive branch think are a threat, he has legitimized what Bush has put forward in an illegitimate way.
Every election cycle, politicians tend to bicker over who should be elected for president or who should be elected for Congress. But do their policies really differ? How much dominance does the two-party system have over the establishment here in Washington and how the country is being run?
Well, there is a permanent corporate government in Washington. President Eisenhower, in his farewell address in 1961, pointed out in a much quoted passage the unwarranted influence sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. Of course, now it's much, much worse. And they have cowed a lot of the media. I mean, look how the media went along with the falsified drumbeat on the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I mean, it was disgraceful. So the two parties are not where the game is really being played. They are the tribunes. They're the voice, they're the sheen, they sign on the dotted line. It's the military-industrial complex. It's largely this insatiable defense industry machine that never says enough is enough in terms of nuclear subs and drones and fighter bombers and armored vehicles. It's out of control. Eisenhower warned us about it. We didn't heed his warning. He knew what he was talking about. He was a five-star general.
Is there a fabricated perception when it comes to the Tea Party's influence? Is there much reality behind this perception that socialism is dominating the country?
Well, it's corporate propaganda. The Tea Party are varying viewpoints. They're not all one viewpoint. But they do share one thing. They're angry about what's going on in the country. And they're being channeled toward Washington without being, in effect, informed, hey, it's Wall Street over Washington. Wall Street is taking control of Washington. Isn't the massive multi-trillion-dollar bailout of these Wall Street crooks by your tax dollars sufficient evidence? So I think the big mistake that Democrats and liberals are making is they're not talking to the Tea Partiers. They're backing off and adjusting and censoring themselves and inflating the power of the Tea Partiers. And so is the media. I mean, there are only 400,000 people who call themselves Tea Partiers who've spent more than 20 hours in the last 6 months on their initiatives and going to rallies and so forth. But you have Glenn Beck, you have Fox Network, you have even the Washington Post and the New York Times pushing. And so it exaggerates them, and that intimidates the Democrats to be less progressive and less liberal. And so who has the momentum? In politics, you simply ask one question: who's on the offensive and who's on the defensive? Once the Democrats became on the defensive, they were falling backward, and they're not going to recover.
The dangers of corporate capitalism is something that you've been following all your life. I wonder about the corporate influence in this election cycle and in Washington in general? Are the corporations creating movements like the Tea Party to maintain their control or their interests?
Yeah, that's their popular front, so to speak. Just like the Communist Party had its popular front, the corporations, knowing they can't be out front because people don't like a lot of these big corporations. They're ripped off by the banks, the credit card companies, the insurance companies. They have the camouflage. And the camouflage is they give the Tea Partiers certain deceptive information and focus on certain politicians. And therefore, they continue to work their will behind the scenes. I mean, we have corporate socialism in this country where profits are kept and losses are socialized on the back of the taxpayer. There isn't a single department or agency in the U.S. government whose outside influence overwhelmingly is not corporate. They control from their outside and putting their executives in high government positions, funding members of Congress with their cash, 35,000 full-time lobbyists in Washington. They are the government. Theodore Dreiser put it very well many, many years ago. He said, the corporations are the government.
I wonder, what role do third-party candidates have in election cycles and influencing the politics in this country when you have this two-party system that has been in place for so long?
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-party dictatorship, and they control the state laws of ballot access, so they obstruct small parties and independent candidates, requiring them to spend inordinate amounts of time and resist litigation that's frivolous to get on the ballot. There's no country in the Western world that obstructs voters and candidates from exercising their democratic rights. In most countries in Western Europe, you have multi-party systems. If the Green Party gets over 5% in Germany, it has over 5% of the parliament. Here, a party can get 49%, the opponent can get 51%, the party that gets 49% gets nothing. So there's no proportional representation. That, with the Electoral College nonsense, feeds a two-party dictatorship. And so the role of third parties is to break open that two-party dictatorship. Where's the party that pushes for a living wage so they can support their family? Well, the Democrats and Republicans, they're not really pushing for that. The Democrats have a better rhetoric, but Barack Obama promised a $9.50 federal minimum wage in the campaign in 2008. He's never talked about it since. It's now $7.25. Walmart wages. 1/3 of the workers in this country make low Walmart-type wages. Isn't that a major area for a third party? So people have got to stop voting for the least worst between the Democrats and Republicans and say they're going to vote for what they believe in. They're going to vote for their conscience. They're going to vote for the best interests of the American people. If it's a third, fourth party, so be it.
You mentioned you sent a letter to a number of different corporate executives saying they should have a taxpayer appreciation day for all the money they stole from the American taxpayers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the political parties are servicing the top 1%, which has, of wealthy people, which has equivalent wealth of the bottom 95% of the American people. Now, that is an inequality that radiates all the way down to why the poor die more, they're injured more, they're ripped off more, the middle class is being pushed down toward the poor. Wealth inequality is not just a bunch of people at the top who have a lot of the gold. It radiates inequality and harm and devastation all the way down the income scale. And the Republican Democrat Party have presided over this tax system that perpetuates it.
What role does the mainstream media have in pandering to corporate interests?
Well, the media puts out some very good reports once in a while, 60 Minutes and so forth. But by and large, they represent the investments of their shareholders, and that means advertising revenue. So they're not going to really go against many of their advertisers, with a few luminous exceptions from time to time. That's the mass media. There's the independent media that seems to be growing modestly. I listen regularly to Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman, for example. You have Pacifica Radio. It needs to be expanded because these media don't represent advertisers. They represent news. And that's why when you turn on them, you say, gee, why haven't I heard that on NBC or CBS? Why in this little station? It's because they're not representing their advertisers, they're representing news. And I think that's the essential difference now in the media.
From what you're saying, it seems like a bit of a hopeless situation here in the United States. Is there any possibility of a revolution here in this country where the people actually revolt against this corporate domination?
Well, inevitably, the cycle turns in American history, and people say enough is enough. I thought the bailout of the crooks in Wall Street would fulfill that enough is enough. But obviously, people are more demoralized and less able to organize. But one of these days, there'll be a few billionaires who put a lot of money into thousands of community organizers networked throughout the country, focusing on Congress to move this country forward and put the people back into the sovereignty arena. The Constitution starts, we the people, not we the corporations.
Ralph Nader, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.